4:51 a.m. Pikes Peak foothills, El Paso County, Colorado. A line of vehicles sits on a fire access road above Manitou Springs. Engines off. No headlights. The temperature is 29 degrees Fahrenheit. A thin crust of overnight frost covers the granite outcroppings on either side of the track. The air at this elevation carries the particular stillness of high-altitude pre-dawn. No wind, no animal sound, the kind of cold that settles into the bones of anyone standing still for more than a few minutes. The operators have been staged for 22 minutes. 12 operators from El Paso County SWAT are staged behind 2 armored vehicles. Beside them, 3 DEA special agents from the Rocky Mountain High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Task Force, 2 FBI Denver field agents, a K-9 unit, 1 Forest Service law enforcement officer. Every radio is set to the Joint Operations Channel. Every operator has reviewed the site schematic at least twice in the last 4 hours. The briefing packet ran to 31 pages, including overhead imagery captured by a commercial satellite service the previous afternoon. Below the staging point, 200 yards down a gravel access path, sits a decommissioned granite quarry. A chain-link gate, a rusted access sign, and one detail that does not belong, a padlock so new its shackle still carries the manufacturer's coating. The padlock is polished steel, hardened alloy, commercial grade. The gate it secures is oxidized chain link threaded with rust along every horizontal bar. The contrast between old infrastructure and new hardware is visible even in the low ambient light of a July pre-dawn. The operators nearest the gate have already noted it without needing to be told. That padlock is the reason they are here. What the team does not yet know, what no one outside the quarry knows, is that on the other side of that gate, inside a locked mobile office trailer on a gravel pad, 5 American women are waiting. They have been there for 49 days. Their names had been on Colorado missing person posters since May. The bolt cutters go to work at 4:53 a.m. 6 weeks earlier, no one inside the Rocky Mountain HIDTA task force had any reason to look at that quarry. The case they were working was a fentanyl distribution network. Pills, not real estate. Pressed tablets moving through the Front Range in quantities that had put El Paso County Medical Examiner's Office on record pace for overdose deaths in the first quarter of 2026. The task force had a supply chain mapped out in rough strokes. Product arriving from the Southwest, distribution points in Colorado Springs and Pueblo, a cell structure that changed contact numbers every 10 days. What they did not have was an address. The cell kept its storage locations off the board. 3 months of surveillance had produced phone intercepts, financial threads, and 2 low-level seizures, but no fixed facility. Operational security was tight in a way that suggested someone in the organization had experience with prior federal scrutiny. The contact number rotations were precise. 10 days, rarely 11, never 9. Whoever was managing the communications discipline had either been trained formally or had learned from a close call. The task force was methodical and patient. The surveillance logs from the 90-day window ran to over 400 individual entries: vehicle descriptions, location pings, transaction records, physical observation notes from rotating field teams. But after 90 days with no physical site, the pressure was beginning to show. Budget cycles were a factor. Personnel assignments were a factor. 3 months of surveillance investment with no hardened location to show for it produces the kind of conversations between supervisors that ask whether the operational approach needs to change. That is the situation on the morning of Monday, June 16, 2026, when a 2-line federal land use flag lands on the desk of a Forest Service special agent at the Pikes Peak Ranger District office in Colorado Springs. The flag was filed by a seasonal forestry worker named in the case record only as employee G7. He had been driving a fire access road above Manitou Springs on the previous Thursday, June 12th, as part of a routine fuel load survey. The road passes the perimeter of the Coldwater Granite Quarry, a site that has been listed as decommissioned on Forest Service records since October 2024. What he filed in 2 sentences was this: fresh diesel tire tracks on the access spur leading to the quarry gate. A padlock on the gate that did not match the age of the surrounding infrastructure. That was it. No alarm, no call to law enforcement. A land use anomaly flag, the kind of administrative notation a seasonal worker files when something on federal land does not match the current site status. The Forest Service's internal protocol for such flags is a Category 3 notation, the lowest tier of administrative concern. It generates no automatic escalation. It sits in a queue alongside reports of unauthorized trail modifications, illegal campfire rings, and fence line encroachments. He drove on. He filed his fuel load survey. He added the flag as a footnote. The detail that stands out in the case timeline is this: the man who triggered the entire operation never called 911. He filed paperwork. It would have sat for weeks, except one thing happened. The Forest Service special agent who received the flag on Monday morning had spent 7 years on federal public lands cases. He had seen illegal mining operations, unauthorized grading, unpermitted road construction. He knew what decommissioned sites looked like from the inside out. He had personally processed 3 unauthorized use cases involving old quarry infrastructure in the Pikes Peak region in the preceding 4 years. 2 of those cases involved illegal dumping. One involved an unlicensed grading contractor using a decommissioned site as a staging yard for equipment. A new padlock on a rusted gate bothered him. Someone was accessing this site regularly and wanted to control that access. Not dumping. Not staging. Controlled access means something being protected, something that warrants the cost and attention of proper hardware. He cross-referenced the quarry's land use file. The site had been inactive since the previous autumn. No permitted activity. No lease extensions filed. No authorized access to the access spur. He escalated the flag to a supervisory level within the Forest Service Law Enforcement and Investigations Division. Standard protocol for suspected unauthorized use of federal land. His supervisor agreed within 2 hours that the notation warranted a formal referral rather than a queue hold. By Tuesday, June 17th, the flag had been routed to the regional interagency desk. And on Wednesday, June 18th, it landed on a whiteboard inside the DEA Rocky Mountain HIDTA Task Force office in Colorado Springs. 2 lines of administrative notation placed next to a fentanyl case that had been stalled for 3 months. The connection was not obvious. It required a step that only happened because one analyst on the task force had spent the previous month tracing shell company ownership of properties in El Paso and Teller counties. Her name in the case record is Analyst R. She had been looking at the financial architecture of the distribution cell, not real estate, but following the money as it moved through limited liability structures. The method was painstaking. Corporate filings pulled from state databases, registered agent records cross-referenced against known organizational contacts, wire transfer patterns matched against property transaction dates. She had built a map of shell company relationships that covered an entire wall of her workspace. 41 LLCs, across 6 states, most of them dormant or single transaction entities. 3 weeks earlier, she had flagged a company called Ridgeline Mineral Holdings, LLC, incorporated in Nevada in January 2026, with a registered agent address in a mail drop office on North Academy Boulevard in Colorado Springs. Ridgeline Mineral Holdings had no website, no active mining permits, no equipment filings with the Colorado Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. What it did have was a lease assignment, filed with El Paso County in February 2026. The lease covered operating rights to one decommissioned granite quarry site in the Pikes Peak foothills above Manitou Springs. The Coldwater Granite Quarry. Analyst R had flagged Ridgeline 3 weeks earlier as a possible money movement vehicle, a shell structure with no obvious business activity. she had not yet connected it to a physical location. The Colorado lease filing was in a county database that required a separate search protocol from the state LLC registry. The two records lived in different systems with no automatic cross-reference function. The Forest Service flag gave her the address. She cross-referenced the quarry coordinates against the lease assignment. The property reference numbers matched. She pulled up the task force's existing file on the distribution cell. The financial threads running through the cell's known accounts included 3 wire transfers in February and March 2026, each one routed through a Nevada LLC that had been used to pay operational expenses. 2 of those transfers were for amounts consistent with lease deposits and equipment rental. The amounts were not large enough, individually, to trigger automatic financial surveillance thresholds. Taken together, against the lease filing dates, they told a coherent story. The Nevada LLC was Ridgeline Mineral Holdings. What she had found, in 36 hours of cross-referencing, was that the fentanyl distribution cell the task force had been chasing for 3 months owned the quarry through a shell mining company. The quarry, listed as decommissioned, sitting idle on federal adjacent land, was a storage and operations site for the cell. That was the original assessment. A pill warehouse, a hardened stash location. What no one knew yet was that the pills were only part of what was being held there. The task force went to a federal magistrate in Denver on Thursday, June 19th, for a search and arrest warrant package. The affidavit ran 42 pages. It laid out the financial architecture of Ridgeline Mineral Holdings, the lease assignment, the Forest Service land use anomaly, and the 3-month history of the fentanyl trafficking investigation. Analyst R had worked through the night of June 18th to complete the financial exhibit package. The affidavit's evidentiary core was her 3 weeks of shell company mapping, compressed into a 20-page exhibit that the task force attorney described in later internal communications as among the cleaner financial architecture presentations he had reviewed in a decade of federal narcotics work. The magistrate signed the warrants the same day. The tactical plan called for a coordinated entry at first light on a date to be set within 72 hours, pending surveillance confirmation that the site was active. Remote observation of the quarry perimeter was authorized to begin immediately. On Friday morning, June 20th, a Forest Service law enforcement officer, working with the task force under a joint operation designation, conducted a discreet drive past of the quarry access road. He confirmed active power generation. The sound of a generator running inside the locked mobile office trailer on the quarry pad was audible from the road. He did not stop. He did not slow below normal road speed. The drive past was timed for a window when the access spur was not visible to anyone positioned at the trailer's forward-facing window vents. The trailer had been on site since at least early April, based on satellite imagery pulled from a commercial archive. It sat on a concrete pad at the rear of the quarry, backed against the granite face. Steel door. Window vents covered from the inside. The surveillance officer noted the window coverings in his log. He used a specific phrase, interior window obstructions, consistent with deliberate light and visibility control. That language was more precise than was required for a drive-past log entry. He had been doing federal land enforcement long enough to know that the specificity might matter later. That detail, windows covered from the inside, was added to the warrant package as a supplemental notation. At the time, the task force read it as operational security for a drug storage facility. Dark windows on a drug stash house were not unusual. By Saturday afternoon, the task force commander made the call. Entry on Tuesday, July 8th, at first light, 4:45 a.m. What's most surprising about this case isn't the size of the fentanyl seizure, or even the shell company structure the cell used to acquire federal adjacent land. It's the 48 hours between warrant signing and the moment the task force learned there was a second reason to go in fast. That information came from a source that had nothing to do with the fentanyl investigation. On Sunday, June 22nd, the Denver FBI field office received a contact through its tip line. The caller identified herself as the sister of a 24-year-old Denver woman, named in this reconstruction as Marlena V., who had been reported missing on May 21st. Marlena had been a registered home health aide working through a placement agency in the Stapleton neighborhood of Denver. She was described by her family and former colleagues as organized, professionally careful, and experienced enough in the home health industry to evaluate job offers critically. In late April, she had responded to what appeared to be a recruiting notice for a higher-paying nursing support position with a company called Front Range Care Partners. Front Range Care Partners had a professional website, a Colorado Springs address that turned out to be a mail drop suite, a phone number that routed to a call forwarding service. The website listed staff credentials, a mission statement, and a services menu consistent with a legitimate medical staffing firm. The visual design was polished. The credential listings were fabricated, but the fabrication was not obvious to someone reviewing the site without access to professional licensing databases. The Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies had no record of Front Range Care Partners as a licensed placement entity, but that registry was not publicly searchable in a way that an ordinary job seeker would know to consult. Marlena had gone to an intake appointment on May 19th. She had not come home. The FBI's Crimes Against Children and Adult Victims Unit had been working her case, and 4 other missing person cases filed between May 15th and May 28th as a potential organized disappearance cluster. The 5 women were between 23 and 27 years old. All 5 had responded to the same Front Range Care Partners recruiting notice. All 5 had attended intake appointments at a rented office suite on Bijou Street in Colorado Springs. All 5 had last been seen in the 2-day window around May 19th and 20th. The Bijou Street suite had been rented for 60 days under a name that cross-referenced to another Nevada LLC. The building's property manager told investigators it had been occupied by a professional-looking operation, a front desk setup, printed materials, a waiting area. 2 individuals had staffed the suite during its operation. Both were described as presenting as professional administrative personnel. Neither had been identified in the early stages of the FBI investigation. The FBI case agent working the cluster had identified Front Range Care Partners as a fraudulent recruiting front. The suite on Bijou Street had been vacated. The LLC registration traced to another Nevada mail drop. On Sunday, June 22nd, Marlena's sister called the tip line because she had been doing her own research. She had been doing it for weeks, methodically, the way a person does when the official investigation appears stalled and the alternative is waiting. She had been searching Colorado business registration databases, Nevada incorporation records, and Wyoming LLC filings. She was looking for any company name that had appeared in the Front Range Care Partners contact history. She had found the name Ridgeline Mineral Holdings in a Colorado Secretary of State search, because both it and Front Range Care Partners had used the same Nevada registered agent service. The same address, the same agent of record, filed within 30 days of each other. She had written it down in a notebook. She had searched Ridgeline Mineral Holdings and found the El Paso County lease assignment. She had seen that the lease covered a property described as a decommissioned quarry in the Pikes Peak foothills, and she had called the FBI tip line. The tip reached the FBI Denver case agent on Sunday evening. She read it twice. She pulled the Ridgeline Mineral Holdings name and ran it against her open case files. It was not in her missing persons investigation record. It was not a name she had encountered in 6 weeks of working the cluster. By Sunday night, she was on the phone with the DEA task force commander. The connection between the fraudulent nursing recruiter and the shell company that owned the quarry was the same Nevada registered agent service, a detail that surfaced not through any federal database, but through a grieving sister's late-night search of public incorporation records. The task force moved the entry date forward. Tuesday was now too far away. The operation was reset for Wednesday, July 2nd at 4:45 a.m. The phone call between the FBI case agent and the task force commander was brief. 5 women, missing 43 days, connected to the same shell infrastructure as your quarry. The response: we go in 48 hours. 43 days missing. 48 hours to entry. The moral weight of that arithmetic sat on the task force for 2 days. In the 36 hours between that Sunday phone call and the pre-dawn staging on July 2nd, the Joint Task Force conducted a compressed reassessment of the entire tactical plan. The original entry design had been built around a drug storage facility, a site where the primary risk was armed resistance by cell members protecting product. The new intelligence changed the calculus in a specific way. A potential occupied trailer with non-combatant subjects inside required a modified entry protocol. The breach approach was adjusted. The position of medical units was moved from a quarter-mile down the fire road to a direct staging position just outside the quarry spur. 3 ambulances instead of 1. The FBI case agent drove to Colorado Springs on the morning of July 1st to participate in the revised tactical brief. She brought photographs from the 5 missing person files. She briefed the SWAT element on what the subjects might look like after extended confinement, physical and psychological indicators to anticipate. She had consulted by phone with a trauma physician at UC Health on the morning of July 1st about the likely medical profile of individuals held for approximately 7 weeks in conditions of stress and limited mobility. The physician's input shaped how the EMT teams were briefed for the ambulance staging. That briefing lasted 40 minutes. It was not in the original operational plan. It happened because the FBI case agent drove 4 hours round trip to be in the room. The quarry site, as reconstructed from the operational plan and post-entry forensic documentation, occupied a natural bowl formation in the foothills granite. The site had been actively quarried between 1968 and 2024, producing primarily structural granite for commercial construction in the Front Range corridor. At its peak, the operation had employed 42 workers and run 2 production shifts daily. The decommissioning in 2024 had been orderly, equipment removed, site graded, the mobile office trailer left on the concrete pad at the owner's election, pending a site assessment that was never completed before the ownership changed hands through the lease assignment to Ridgeline Mineral Holdings. The mobile office trailer was a standard commercial unit, the kind rented by construction sites across the region. 35 feet long, 14 feet wide. Constructed with steel wall panels over a wood frame interior, it had a single entry door on the east-facing end, 2 window vent panels on the long south wall, and a service utility port on the north wall where the generator connection ran through. The generator outside the east wall was a 6,000-watt diesel unit, the size typically used to power small construction offices. It was chained to a ground anchor driven into the concrete pad. Fuel drums, 4 of them, each holding 50 gallons, were positioned beside it under a corrugated metal lean-to. The fuel supply was sufficient for extended continuous operation. The drums were approximately 60% full at the time of entry, indicating they had been partially consumed and at some point replenished. Someone had driven fuel to this site at least once during the 49-day window. That logistical act, driving out to a decommissioned quarry with diesel drums, required either the complicity or the incuriosity of anyone who might have observed it. The fire access road sees minimal traffic. A seasonal forestry worker on a fuel load survey. The occasional hiker who misreads the trailhead turnoff. Otherwise, nobody. It was designed to be unobserved. It nearly was. But something doesn't sit right about this. The fraudulent recruiting Front Range Care Partners, had been operating long enough to disappear 5 women, vacate its office suite, and dissolve its visible presence before either the FBI or the DEA had any reason to connect it to the quarry. The 5 missing person cases had each been filed separately, with different law enforcement jurisdictions, 2 with Denver PD, 1 with Colorado Springs PD, 1 with Jefferson County Sheriff, 1 with the FBI directly. The cluster was not formally identified as related until the FBI's Adult Victims Unit began cross-referencing intake appointment locations in early June. The cross-referencing required a manual review of 5 separate case files held in 4 separate agency databases. There is no automated system that performs that function across those jurisdictions in real time. That took 3 weeks. For the FBI case agent, those 3 weeks meant working 5 open missing person files spread across 5 different originating agencies, with no physical location and no confirmed connection. The only thread was a fake LLC with a vacated office. The women could be anywhere. 3 weeks to identify the cluster. Another 3 weeks to develop the Quarry connection. The total elapsed time from the first missing person report to entry at the Quarry gate, 49 days. The question of whether a faster interagency connection could have reduced that timeline is not answered anywhere in the case record. It hangs there. In the days following the July 2nd entry, investigators working the forensic processing of the Quarry site documented the interior of the mobile office trailer in detail. The rear section, the 14 by 20 foot space where the 5 women had been held, contained 5 military surplus cots, 2 portable propane space heaters that had been inactive, a chemical toilet behind a plywood partition, a case of bottled water, and packaged food supplies consistent with approximately 2 weeks of minimum caloric provision. The food supply had been partially consumed and not restocked in recent days. The water supply was also partially depleted. The timeline reconstruction suggested that the last resupply visit to the Quarry had occurred approximately 10 to 12 days before the July 2nd entry. Someone had made the calculation, at some point in the preceding 2 weeks, that the operation was close enough to its conclusion, in whatever form that conclusion was intended to take, that resupply was no longer a priority. That calculation, and what it implies about the intended end state for the 5 women, is part of what the ongoing federal investigation is working to establish. It is not addressed in the July 10th indictment. It is addressed obliquely in sealed supporting documents that have not been publicly released. The tactical brief for the July 2nd entry was distributed to all participating units at 10 p.m. on July 1st. The Quarry site, approximately 4 acres of gravel pad, granite face on the north and west sides, chain link perimeter on the south and east. 1 vehicle access point, the gated spur off the fire road. 2 structures, an equipment shed, open, and the mobile office trailer, locked. Power from a diesel generator positioned outside the trailer's east wall. Entry plan: bolt cutters on the gate, vehicle approach to the trailer under cover, K9 sweep of the open areas, simultaneous approach to the trailer door. The trailer door was a commercial steel unit with a deadbolt and a padlock hasp. The same new padlock hardware that the seasonal forestry worker had noticed on the gate. At 4:50 a.m. on July 2, 2026, the K9 unit completed its sweep of the open quarry pad and returned a negative on explosive ordnance. The SWAT element moved to the trailer. The operators moved without lights, using the ambient illumination from the generator's running indicator and the diffused pre-dawn gray over the granite walls of the quarry bowl. At that hour, at that elevation, the sky carries just enough light to distinguish shapes. Not enough to read expression. Enough to move. The generator was running. Power to the trailer was live. One operator cut the padlock hasp with a hydraulic cutter. A second operator applied a battering ram to the deadbolt. The door opened at 4:53 a.m. The case record uses clinical language for what the entry team encountered. 5 adult female subjects, alive, in medical distress, consistent with prolonged confinement. That is the phrase in the operational after-action report. They were seated or lying on cots at the rear of the trailer. The interior temperature was 41 degrees Fahrenheit. The generator had been running heat on a timer, set to minimum. The space measured approximately 14 feet by 40 feet. A partition divided the rear section from a front work area where evidence of the fentanyl operation was immediately visible: a pill press, packaging materials, chemical precursors, and a quantity of finished product later counted at approximately 300,000 tablets. The 5 women were 23, 24, 24, 26, and 27 years old. Each had been reported missing between May 15th and May 28th. The oldest had last been seen 49 days prior to the entry. Medical personnel from 3 waiting ambulances staged on the fire road were called forward at 4:56 a.m. The call went over the Joint Operations Channel in plain language. No code. No clinical euphemism. The task force commander transmitted, "Subjects located, alive, require immediate medical assistance. Move forward now." The ambulance teams had been staged 200 yards back, engines running, for 23 minutes. They were at the trailer door in under 90 seconds. Each woman was walked out of the trailer by SWAT personnel and wrapped in a thermal blanket. The ambulances were loaded and moving by 5:22 a.m. At 5:24 a.m., the task force commander transmitted a single line to the Joint Operations Channel. 5 subjects recovered, ambulatory. That was the rescue. No firefight. No dramatic standoff. The quarry was occupied by 2 individuals who were taken into custody at the gate and in the equipment shed without resistance. Both were low-level cell members assigned to on-site operations. Neither was the organizational leadership. The individual at the gate had been sleeping in the cab of a pickup truck. The individual in the equipment shed was awake, sitting on a folding chair, and offered no resistance when SWAT operators entered. Both were secured with minimal incident. Neither made any statement at the scene. The leadership problem is where the case becomes more complicated. The warrant package had identified a cell structure with at least 6 operational roles. The 2 individuals taken at the quarry were operational support, not decision-makers. The Colorado Springs and Denver simultaneous arrest warrants, executed at 2 additional locations at the same 4:53 a.m. window, produced 2 more arrests, a logistics coordinator and a finance manager for the distribution network. The logistics coordinator was taken at a residential address in the Briargate neighborhood of Colorado Springs. The finance manager was arrested at an extended stay hotel off Interstate 25 in Denver. Both were taken without incident. That was 4 in custody. The indictment, filed under seal on July 7th and unsealed on July 10th, charged 6 individuals with federal drug trafficking, conspiracy, and related counts. 6 charged. 4 in custody as of entry day. 2 had not been at any of the target locations. The case record notes that both remaining subjects had departed their known addresses in the 48-hour window prior to the operation. The task force had maintained surveillance on all known addresses through the operation window. Both subjects left their residences on July 1st, 1 day before entry. Surveillance logs confirmed that both departures occurred within a 4-hour window on the afternoon of July 1st. The departures were not coordinated in any way that surveillance captured. No observed communication, no shared vehicle. But the timing was too close to be independent. The operational security breach is noted in the case record without attribution. The investigation into how the cell received advance warning is listed as ongoing in the July 10th filing. 2 of the 6 indicted individuals remain at large as of the date of this reconstruction. We will say what the case record does not say directly. The fact that 2 cell members vacated their locations 24 hours before a covert operation raises a question the federal investigation has not publicly answered. It is the thread in this case that remains pulled but not resolved. The fentanyl seizure, approximately 300,000 finished tablets recovered from the trailer's front workspace, was processed by DEA forensic teams at the quarry site over the following 12 hours. The tablets were consistent in chemical profile, with product that had been linked to multiple overdose deaths in El Paso County in the preceding 90 days. The pill press recovered on site was capable of producing the volume the task force had been tracking through distribution channels. A forensic chemistry team from the DEA Southwest Laboratory was on site by noon on July 2nd. Their preliminary analysis confirmed the chemical profile match within 6 hours. The shell company Ridgeline Mineral Holdings and the fraudulent recruiting front Front Range Care Partners were both traced to a common ownership structure, 3 layers of Nevada and Wyoming LLCs, ultimately controlled by financial instruments tied to 2 of the 6 indicted individuals. The financial investigation into the full asset structure is ongoing. As of the date of the indictment unsealing, no assets have been formally forfeited. There is a line in the federal indictment supporting documentation that reads almost like something assembled from 2 separate cases by accident, because for 49 days, it was 2 separate cases. The drug trafficking investigation and the missing persons investigation ran in parallel, in different offices, across different agencies, for 6 weeks. They converged only because a sister stayed up late searching Nevada business registration records. That is not a failure of any individual investigator. It is a structural description of how parallel federal investigations operate. Each office works its case. The connection surfaces when it surfaces. The convergence mechanism was unconventional, a civilian connecting 2 shell companies through a public database search. This shouldn't have been the primary detection pathway. It was meant to be redundancy. It worked. But it should not have been necessary. The 5 women received treatment at 2 Colorado Springs area hospitals. The nature and duration of that treatment is not detailed in publicly available records. What the case record states is that all 5 were transported from the Quarry site and that each received inpatient evaluation. Their names have not been publicly released. The missing person posters that went up in May, in Denver neighborhoods, on community boards, in the windows of the Colorado Springs businesses where some of them had worked, those posters were taken down by family members in early July. Marlena V's sister has not given a public statement. The seasonal forestry worker who filed the original land use flag, the 2-line anomaly report about fresh tire tracks and a new padlock, received a formal written commendation from the Forest Service Regional Director. He was identified in agency communications as the initial trigger point for the converging investigation. He has not spoken publicly. His name does not appear in the indictment. It does not need to. What he did was notice that a rusted gate had a new lock. And then he filled out the right form. The most consequential moment in this federal operation, the thing that actually moved the case, was an administrative form filed by a seasonal employee on a Thursday afternoon. Not a confidential informant. Not a surveillance operation. A land use flag. Paperwork. The form routed through a Forest Service special agent who had enough experience to be bothered by a discrepancy. That agent escalated it. An analyst 3 levels removed connected it to a financial thread she had been working for a month. A sister's search of public records provided the final link. The chain from parking lot observation to Quarry entry took 20 days. The chain from the first missing person report to Quarry entry took 49 days. Those 2 numbers describe the same case from 2 different starting points. The investigation that worked, the drug trafficking case, moved faster because it had a physical anchor to work toward. The investigation that was stalled, the missing persons cluster, had no anchor until the drug case provided one. That asymmetry is not specific to this case. It is a recurring feature of how parallel federal investigations interact, or fail to. The 6-week gap between the first missing person report and the Quarry connection points to a structural problem, not a resource problem. Each agency works its own case because its metrics, its funding, and its institutional reputation are tied to its own case closure. The missing persons investigation and the drug trafficking investigation shared zero institutional incentive to merge until a private citizen forced the connection. The tactical outcome at the Quarry on July 2nd was clean. 49 days in, 5 women out. 4 arrests executed simultaneously. 300,000 fentanyl tablets off the market. A shell company structure exposed. The loose threads are these. 2 of 6 indicted individuals remain at large. Their current locations are unknown. The Federal Marshal's Service has active warrants. No public information on their whereabouts has been released. The total financial architecture of the distribution cell has not been mapped. The asset forfeiture investigation is open. No funds have been recovered. Front Range Care Partners, the fraudulent nursing recruiter, was one of at least 3 similarly structured LLCs identified in the indictment's supporting documentation as potential front entities. Whether those other structures were operational or operational in other locations is not addressed in the July 10th filing. The Coldwater Granite Quarry site was secured by federal authorities on July 2nd and has been under DEA and FBI forensic review since. The lease held by Ridgeline Mineral Holdings has been suspended by El Paso County, pending the outcome of the federal case. One detail from the case record stands out. The generator outside the mobile office trailer was set to a timer. It ran heat on minimum, enough to keep the interior above freezing, not enough for comfort. The timer had been programmed when the trailer was first occupied in mid-May. Whoever set that timer had planned for the trailer to be occupied for an extended period from the beginning. That is not the operational planning of someone improvising. It is the operational planning of an organization that had done this before, or had studied how to do it, or both. The investigation into the full scope of that organization is ongoing. The network that operated through Ridgeline Mineral Holdings and Front Range Care Partners is, per the July 10th indictment, dismantled in its Colorado operations. The indictment does not use the word dismantled. It lists specific charges against 6 named defendants. What the indictment leaves open, deliberately, in the way federal charging documents always leave open, is whether the organizational structure extends beyond the 6 named individuals. The case agent from the FBI Denver field office, in a brief statement released alongside the indictment unsealing on July 10th, said, "The investigation is continuing." That is the entire public statement. The 2 individuals remaining at large had, according to task force records, communicated with organizational contacts outside Colorado in the 90-day surveillance window. The nature of those contacts and their location are part of the ongoing investigation. The Pikes Peak foothills above Manitou Springs are quiet now. The fire access road is open for routine forestry use. The quarry gate has a new federal seal on it, the Forest Service's standard decommissioned site closure hardware. It looks the same as it did before, except now the padlock is a federal one. The seasonal worker drives those roads as part of his summer assignment. The fuel load survey is ongoing. He files his reports. On June 12th, he noticed that a rusted gate had a new lock. He wrote it down. That is the entire action. What followed, the cross-referencing, the warrants, the 48-hour decision, the bolt cutters at 4:53 in the morning, none of that exists without the 2-line form he filed on a Thursday afternoon. 5 women, ages 23 to 27, were on missing person posters in Colorado for 49 days. Their faces on laminated sheets in laundromat windows and community center bulletin boards. Their families checking phones. Waiting. The women are no longer missing. The organization that took them is partially dismantled and partially at large. The generator at the quarry site, still tagged as evidence, was set on a timer that suggested it was built to run indefinitely. The network is fractured. The demand and the organizational infrastructure that served it are not fully accounted for. 2 people with knowledge of both remain unlocated. The paperwork trail that found them started with a seasonal worker who noticed something that did not match. That is how the case broke open. Not with a confidential informant. Not with a wiretap. With a form. Filed correctly. Read by the right person.